Hello, everybody. I'm going to do half on and half off because I'm cool like that. So, my name is Mike Butcher. I'm editor-at-large for TechCrunch, a little breaking news website out of San Francisco, and I'm the London guy. We basically got a pretty cool group here because I'm the only idiot journalist here who's going to opine with no actual information. Everybody else is actually an expert, so that's fantastic, isn't it? We've got, I'll just read it out here, Mads Holman from Biblio, who are a startup who just raised a seed round, about 1.2 million. Dan Gilbert from News UK on the data side, and Grace Boswood from Design and Engineering and BBC. Grace, you run the entire BBC technology stack, is that correct?
Design and Engineering department.
Design and Engineering.
I don't personally, I'm afraid.
You make everything work anyway.
I do make sure the money goes to the right place.
Fantastic. So what we're going to do is we're going to sort of start inside a media organisation and then sort of zoom out to 30,000 feet or to the reporting on ISIS from the field kind of thing. So what I wanted to, if I can start off with you, Dan, at News UK, you're essentially got a lot of data inside the company. Would you say it's fair assessment that effectively media organisations now are slowly realising that the amount of data that they're sitting on and trying to kind of effectively sort of lurch into a kind of a technology world now, right?
Yes, it's taken time. I started working in media about 5 or 6 years ago, and back then it was very analytics focused, so just trying to harness information we had on our customers to figure out who was buying what. I guess as like various trends have taken place in the market over the last 2 or 3 years with kind of advances in data science, all these capabilities from cloud vendors, we're moving more into kind of more interesting stuff around actually helping journalists, the editors, do stuff with the content data itself, which was kind of impossible back then. So yeah, it's kind of moving in that direction.
I mean, might as well ask you straight off, are you using any kind of AI style approaches to this stuff?
Yes, so whether it's, I guess, trying to figure out what our customers are going to do next, involves kind of predictive algorithms, which I guess you could call AI. It's kind of gone through a bit of a hype cycle of rebranding it, through to the stuff which is, I guess, touching more on real AI, so actually trying to help journalists do automated fact-checking, reading the content of articles with machines and applying some of the algorithms to do that kind of stuff, which is much more in that territory.
I really want to get into that actually, especially the content fact-checking stuff. Grace, is that something, does that sound familiar to you, what Dan just said?
Entirely familiar, and I think the cultural shift has been really interesting over the past few years from data as an enemy to data as a friend, and particularly the kind of content creators we work with every day who don't necessarily enjoy the idea of being directed. And we were laughing earlier and saying, well, I often get told to stop weaponizing data, Grace, stop weaponizing data. We know what we do, we know our audiences. And what we're really seeing now is a cultural shift towards actually being able to create better content experiences and more valuable content experiences as a result of this data and a result of simple things like recommendations, which again you could call AI but is on the fringes, into more pure AI, speech to text, voice AI experiences, etc., which are really allowing us to push our boundaries and deliver value in new ways.
And at Biblio, let's hear the kind of elevator pitch briefly about what Biblio is, so that everybody's aware of what it is.
Yeah, so we're essentially a recommendation engine. We read all the content, understand all the content with NLP, and then we combine that with behavioral data to try to find the right piece of content for the right person. But I think the context is much wider, right? I think, as I always say, what few people realize is that billions of people are exposed to AI every day through Facebook's newsfeed, and everything that we see is ultimately generated by algorithms all across YouTube, Facebook, Spotify, Netflix, and so in many ways, I guess we say that at the heart of every content platform in the future will be some AI trying to match content to users, because there's more content that one user could ever consume.
But I mean, what sort of partners do you have? Where are you getting all the content?
So we work B2B with people. So we run across people like The Economist, National Geographic, tons of magazines. So I guess we sort of target the type of organizations who can't necessarily afford a Dan or a data science team and a bunch of specialists working on this. But
Dan is very expensive.
Particularly expensive. but I guess there's really a lot of media companies out there for which anything from a content management system to a recommender system is sort of technology a little bit beyond their own scope, right? They're a content company, they live and breathe content, not necessarily heavy technology.
And you're trying to kill Tabula, is that right?
If we can, yes. I'm quite tired of sort of content recommendation being essentially a cover for ad networks. So I think we should get back to the customer being the customer and trying to find the right content for that person.
Customer, reader, content consumer, yeah.
Audience, I think.
Audience.
Audience.
Let's do
I think that's
audience.
That's a prerequisite.
And more of our customers are calling them members.
Yes, absolutely. Well, will the BBC ever have membership? Well, I suppose if you pay your tax fee, your license fee, they're a membership.
Well, what is a license fee payer? I'm going into very semantic arguments, and actually it's a concept recently we have been exploring in terms of membership and advocacy, particularly in kind of around the licensing settlement. Happily, we're past that now, so now we're really I don't get too hung up on semantics. What I'm really interested in, though, is a more audience-centric view which data can give us that allows us to connect the whole BBC. So at the moment, you log into iPlayer, and you have to do that now. That was quite a deep breath for the BBC in the past 18 months or so, and that allows us to serve recommendations based on your video habits. The next step for us is going to be allowing those recommendations to extend across your audio habits, your news habits, your sport habits, etc., which is a really distinctive play for us. And frankly, it's a technology we haven't cracked yet. And where the data science and AI teams that I work with are really working very hard to allow these recommendations engines to work across media types and across media formats. That's even before we get into 100 years of archived content, which obviously has no data connected to it yet.
Please, can you open up the archives? I can't stand the fact that it's only available for like a month or something. Anyway, we'll do that another time. How is it actually supercharged consumption? Applying algorithms to your content.
Well, obviously, if we can give you better... So 12 months ago, I kid you not, if you watch an episode of Top Gear on iPlayer, we just asked you, do you want to watch this episode again? Now, for your 3-year-old child on kind of Bing, that might work. Children love watching stuff again. In my experience, is adults not so keen on watching the same episode again. No. So that was a very simple trick for us, right? If we could get you a new piece of content, we're doing better than that. At the moment, it's a relatively simple journey, and what we need to do is just make that journey more sophisticated, because if we don't, then other companies will do it better than us, and people will choose to watch their content in other places. Netflix is a company we think a lot about and who's doing that very effectively. But really crucially as well, we think there's a really distinctive point for the BBC in really how we use recommendations and algorithms to create the kind of digital version of a TV schedule. Before we informed, educated, entertained, we had an episode of EastEnders, and after that was the news. By doing that, we felt we were doing real societal good. It sounds very worthy, but it's why we work there. We really do believe we are. In a digital world, we need to use algorithms in order to replicate that behaviour, allow you to recommend content not just based on your past consumption behaviours, but also on how the distinctive public service role the BBC has to play.
What sort of algorithms, shall we say, is News UK applying to its content?
So it really ranges from, I guess, where you are in that whole content life cycle. So as a journalist, you're trying to figure out what content to plan for, or as an editor, through to the actual production, ending up where you actually then try to promote that content to get more people to read it, be on social, whatever. We passionately believe that there are places where machine learning and kind of AI techniques could help with that. The thing is, this is all still pretty new. So you've had big marketing companies building churn models, cross-sell models for decades, and there are books out there that people can read that kind of back when people printed books. A lot of the stuff in the newsroom is really new, partly because a lot of the technology that allows you to actually look at content, classify images, try to determine trends in kind of that actual text is really only coming about in the last couple of years. So we're trying lots of things, and it's all pretty nuanced because, the Times is a couple of 100 years old. They have great domain expertise. You can't just jump in as a data scientist and try and say we're going to solve all of it. So it's kind of working. It's not data scientists in a bunker trying to solve problems. It's data scientists trying to work with the editors and journalists to figure out what problems you have in your workflow. So I've got 400 articles today. What the hell do I put on social to try and drive some traffic.
Yeah.
I can use my domain expertise and and I'll probably get it right most of the time, but can an algorithm help maybe nudge me where I may have missed something? Or
Are they nudging how people treat headlines?
That's kind of like one of the next goals.
Yeah.
We've started, I would say, playing around with it, but we've not got to that level of sophistication yet. But it's kind of, it feels like something that's possibly tractable with algorithms you've got available today.
Yeah. At TechCrunch, we have a social team who are very, very good at working out what will fly on social compared to, say, on the website. But that's not an AI approach. But it's a data-led approach, but it's not an AI approach or an algorithmic approach at this point. Let me ask you another question. While you're answering, I'm going to do some stage management. Did you see some cultural pushback? From the editorial and media teams when you started to introduce more, this data-led approach, or were they kind of like, yes, give me more, etc.?
I think it's shifted dramatically. So a couple of years ago, it was pretty tough. I think now there's massive curiosity and massive enthusiasm, but again, it's only, I guess when I joined news, the first approach was trying to essentially make friends in the newsroom, talk to people, understand their workflows, probably not actually get much work done.
Did you ever get shouted at by any editors?
I get shouted at occasionally, particularly when
journalists are terribly nice people sometimes.
Yeah. Normally it's about more prosaic or mundane issues like the web analytics breaks, and it's like WTF, kind of, it's where's our traffic gone?
Right, yeah.
But it's really about building those relationships, and again, and not building stuff in a bunker that you think will solve their problem when it's actually just going to kind of miss the mark.
Yeah, at Biblio, you're obviously not in a news organisation. You're in a sort of, trying to provide a content service. What are some of your thoughts about sort of where it's all heading? What's the sort of end game?
So I think we kind of see two trends. I think there's obviously this trend of personalization when it comes to the audience side of things. Without a doubt, if you sort of summarize the last 10 years, it's the victory march of Google and Facebook and these kind of technologies to aggregate a bunch of content and find the right thing and sort of dominate the end user. I think we're seeing a bit of a pushback. So we work with a lot of sort of vertical media, and there's a real sort of drive back towards actually delivering editorial value. I think as one person, actually end consumer I spoke to, said, most of the time when I log into these personalized engines, it's sort of my own unimaginative self that's staring me in the face. And I think that's one of the real downsides of this whole personalization, is that media becomes more like us, right? But actually I kind of want to be a better person. Maybe not in the short term, but in the longer term. So my joke is, myself, I end up sitting up till 2:30 in the morning watching YouTube, but it doesn't mean I'm proud of myself next morning, right? It doesn't mean I love YouTube more in the long run. And I think a lot of this, there was recent stats on like Facebook fatigue, and I actually think sort of over algorithmically tailoring to people can really lead to fatigue, actually, because it tends to be very short-term optimization, or rather it optimizes to the data we have, maybe not the right data.
It also optimizes for the business model. So those businesses are built on driving time spent, and the way to drive time spent is to send you into a filter bubble and frankly make you feel not very good about yourself, so you carry on, and that's been the way these businesses have built their fortunes. There is an opportunity for other businesses if we can create a distinctive experience which is different and frankly founded on different business principles. And the BBC really does see a role for itself in that world, even if we are not being so driven by time spent and being driven more about value and what consumers feel about the experience that you're giving them.
Well, and I think there's a really interesting point there, because I think, as you say, in the short term, time spent wins, right, for sort of ad-driven businesses. But you say, this sort of weaponization of data, there's also a real battle going on, right? Because say Netflix now, do they want to prioritize their own shows over shows from other people? There's a very good business reason for doing so, but you sort of stop serving the user the moment you start to decide what they should be watching, right? So I think these algorithms are also places where many different parts of the business meet and sort of battle it out almost.
Yeah, and I think the commercial deal shows they are prioritizing their own content over content from third parties, and the BBC is being bitten by that at the moment.
Yeah, oh, absolutely. And you can see it's almost like a net neutrality debate, isn't it? In the sense that, say Netflix is pushing its own shows probably above, third party or licensed shows perhaps. That's a very interesting discussion. I don't know if any of the organisers are listening to me. Hello, Soundstage or whatever. Is this counter my time left? So I have 18 left? Right, okay, thanks for, I thought it was 40. Anyway, started about 25. Let's do some quick chats about that then. And you said the weaponization of data. So we've obviously seen how Facebook was kind of manipulated. The algorithm was sort of manipulated. Inside news organizations, is that a fear of shall we say, sending the readers down a rabbit hole, or even BBC website, for instance, suggests further reading on subjects that takes you down a particular cul-de-sac. I wouldn't necessarily say that you're weaponizing it as such, but that's a completely different issue. But yeah, the filter bubble issue is a problem. Dan, what about your news?
So it's a real mix. So if I'm a subscriber to the Times, when I go onto the website or onto the app, I see the edition. So I see a curated experience, which is the same as what you see, everybody here sees.
Yeah.
In the emails that I receive, they're pretty personalised to basically what we think I'm going to be interested in. So it's a real mix of that editorial stance plus some algorithms in the mix.
The question that you work out how you turn that dial, don't you? About how personalised it gets.
Yeah, and I guess like Matt said, so recommendations engines and things like this, they've been around for a long time, 10 plus years, and kind of off the shelf, it will show you more of what you've already read. We haven't solved it, but things we think long and hard about is how do you inject kind of what is that right mix of editorial creation, algorithms for more of what I want to read, plus some serendipity, and kind of mixing that stuff up. And it's really tough because most of the algorithms aren't designed like that.
Mm-hmm. Grace?
And I think that we also have to get our head around that it'll be different for different audiences and different at different times of the day, different user needs. So some people get their news to the BBC News homepage. That is a very kind of heartland audience. They really appreciate that way of consuming news. But we struggle to really grow reach there because there's some audiences for whom that experience doesn't resonate, and they are getting their news in different places. So we have to work out a way of maybe being less curated, less man behind a desk in a red tie, kind of telling you what the world is, more giving the same messages to those audiences in the way that they appreciate and consume them. And actually, if you think about it, we are very comfortable to do that. When you turn on Radio 1, that is a very different news experience to when you turn on the news at 10. And we need to work out digitally how we curate those experiences for different audiences in the same way. If universal or near universal reach is what's going to underpin your business model, and it is for us. Clearly, it's not for you. It's different business models in play there.
And we're also seeing, what's really fascinating also is that, the millennial generation is now sort of giving away to Generation Z to some extent. That's kind of coming through the pipe now. And the whole consumption game is really probably going to change once more. At Biblio, probably you're seeing some really interesting trends in that respect as well. Sort of new generations coming in and consuming in a different way.
Yeah, I think, the first and foremost is they've never really known another world, right? So the rest of us still grew up in a purely editorial world, and they've sort of grown up in a world where everything was algorithmic in these platforms as long as they can remember. So I think it's more actually about, in a way, educating them about the joy of serendipity, right? This idea that I may not know the whole world, and so actually sometimes showing me things that I might not have immediately. The problem is that doesn't always win in short term. Like if you're an ad-funded business, that's a bad idea. Business-wise, that's not the way to make most money in the short term. I guess what we're trying to argue is that if you want people as customers for 10 years, you can't just put them in a rabbit hole after the first 2 weeks and then just show them more and more of that world, right? At some point, they're going to grow as people and they're going to want more from you. And it's very hard to, with algorithms at the moment, detect when that moment is getting close. I saw a company yesterday who, with wearable devices, are now going to look at our emotions while we consume stuff. And maybe, I don't know if I really want to live in that world, but that could
measure your heartbeat as you watch Love Island or something.
Yeah, and see if that's the right thing for you. And I guess, but it does say something interesting about, at the moment, all of these algorithms don't actually have access to us as people, right? They have access to what we click on, and the stories we read, and the headline, and the title, and what gets the highest click rate. But it really doesn't capture the sort of emotional aspect of being a human being. And I think that's really, for me, the next frontier is how can we begin to really capture what people want, and how does media fit into their lives in a way?
Dan and Grace, inside news organisations, there's been all sorts of criticism. There's been, there's been a sort of weaponization of news. I like this term, fake news. The term fake news is the weaponized version of what used to be called disinformation. I heard that recently, which I thought I'm going to keep using that. Because Mr. Trump uses fake news, and obviously he's an imbecile. But it is effectively what he's talking about is it's a weaponized version of trying to attack the media. And Elon Musk now came out the other day talking about he was going to build this thing called Pravda. Apparently he's even registered Pravda something, because he's so annoyed with a journalist attacking Tesla's share price. Or whatever evaluation. So what's it like being inside a news organisation when you feel that there's a tech company out there that's going to try and attack you with rating you or something like that? What do you think? What did you think about Elon Musk's comments, Grace?
I think that he is wrong. I think that journalism plays an important part of our society, and I think Donald Trump is wrong for the same reason. He goes onto Twitter because he does not like having his nonsense intermediated by someone who might challenge him on the truth, and therefore he speaks directly to a core voter base who aren't interested in what the experts have to say, and I think that is wrong. And I think there's a danger in direct social media platforms and in billionaires choosing to set up their own newspapers in the same way as a billionaire who buys a newspaper and chooses to change the editorial direction of it is a concern which we are openly concerned about and in the public discourse. So I think at the BBC we tend to take pride when things like that happen and say, actually it makes our role more important, not less important, and factors like BBC Monitoring, which really seeks to track globally how these fake news and other developments are kind of having an impact, become more important, and we think more valuable to society, not less.
Do you think, Dan, do you ever see a time when a news organisation will hit back with its own kind of news rating algorithm, or on, Pravda version 2 from News UK or something?
I don't know. I think kind of obviously a lively, diverse media is a good thing. The concern is when the consolidation of power gets so massive with the likes of massive tech companies, and over time, as through the evolution of AI, means that there's kind of more and more automated curation. It gets much more difficult to actually discern where's this information that I'm reading coming from. I know there's a separate track which is all about the ethics and open AI and all of that stuff, and it's I have no idea which way AI is going to go with robots and all of that stuff, but I can't see any other alternative, but kind of increasing focus on people wanting to understand what the provenance of what they're reading is.
And of course, technically speaking, Facebook, it doesn't look like Facebook's anywhere near putting people into Iraq or putting a journalist on the ground, for instance.
Facebook wouldn't say it's a content company. I mean, I think there are many lawsuits ongoing that says that exactly they are not that. They are not content creators. And the fact that they have these very informal partnerships with organisations like ours, but also, dare I say it, less credible news organisations, really muddies that content mix. And I think that if I was looking at the future of the BBC, it means that controlling our own route to audiences becomes extremely important, and we are in trouble if our only route to audiences is through these big kind of, particularly West Coast or Chinese social media companies, because at the end of the day, he who tunes the algorithms controls content discovery, and so we're focusing very, very much on controlling our own content discovery. And I think that the rest of the UK media is
Guardian News, etc., all pursuing similar strategies from what I can see from afar.
Yeah.
Emily Belle, who was the former head of digital media at The Guardian, is now at Columbia School of Journalism, written extensively on Facebook's algorithm as an editor, effectively, which is fascinating stuff, and I commend it to you. I wanted to ask a slightly wild question. Before I ask that question, I'm going to slightly mix things up here, and I'm actually going to do Q&A with you guys. So, because I've got a microphone and I can wander around. So, if you have a question, put your hand up, and I'll come over to you with the microphone that I've got attached to myself, and everyone will be able to hear you. That'll be really cool, huh? What do you think about? I mean, just a total wild card here for you. Do you think crypto and blockchain, cryptocurrencies are going to start to emphasize what people, incentivize people to consume certain types of media? And the algorithm won't be so much what you consume, but what you're paid to read.
I have absolutely no idea, but quite often crypto, blockchain, data science, machine learning, AI all gets bundled into one thing. So I'd stand back and say.
But it is all the one thing, isn't it?
No.
Oh, okay.
I guess there are some interesting projects going on. Things like basic attention token, the sort of idea that you could cut out all these middlemen and essentially sort of trade attention directly between publisher and user.
Is that Steemit is using that?
Yeah,
as well?
Steemit as well. I think at the moment, as much as I sort of think a lot of things in that space is very interesting, there's a lot of adoption problems for end users, right? I think at the moment, actually using these technologies as an end user is not always a very delightful experience.
No.
And so I think until we can lower that barrier, it's just not gonna scale beyond a certain group.
I think it's very early days, isn't it? But back to maybe using AI inside organisations. Ultimately, do you think that what are some of the kind of end game moments you're talking about? You're gradually now starting to get to the point where you're, for instance, nudging humans to say, yeah, you should go with that headline on that social channel or whatever, because that will play better, etc. And it is ultimately, at the end of the day, an attention game in the media, isn't it? What's beyond that, Dan?
Well, I guess you say attention game.
Any questions, anybody? Yeah, you got one. Okay, keep going.
Quite often
you got one of those. No, you keep that.
Quite often we're trying to introduce kind of data for people to make decisions on, but it is a bit of a cat and mouse game of, as you create more data in the newsroom for people to make decisions on, or people in the business to make decisions on, you can start to introduce some kind of unintended consequences of people trying to chase a metric. And I think just as the whole of AI and machine learning is evolving and evolving, the way you introduce this stuff never really stands still. You constantly have to kind of move what you're introducing to respond to the fact that people might be responding to it in a negative way.
Grace?
I don't know. If I can get my newsroom to adopt data, then I'll start worrying about the next thing. In my experience, journalists are a kind of difficult bunch, and so we're quite far away from that.
Yeah, long may it rain. Question there.
Hi, I went to a talk earlier today where the panel from Camerama were showing a feature film that had been made in 48 hours by AI. It was a bit rough and ready, but you could see where they were going with this and that there was some coherence to the story. I wondered what your opinions were of the role of AI in content creation and how that will work within news organisations, and whether that's a threat or an opportunity.
Well, so content creation by AI.
Well, I guess some areas already are being done, right? Stock updates and baseball and things like that are sort of highly repetitive and statistical. I think my best example is from music, right? We've actually been able for a few years now to write music that's sort of passes the Turing test. You can't hear if it's a machine or a person, but we haven't had a sort of algorithmic superstar yet, right? Because it turns out that people also buy the person. You can write great music, but that's not the same as a brand or a user wants to buy that CD. So I think at least for now, there's still a brand, and I actually sort of one of the advices I think we have to news organizations is brand your people, right? Because actually people to a certain degree also want to buy people and belonging and identity, not just content. I think that's really the biggest change that companies like Spotify and Netflix have brought about, is that the content is both utility, but it's also experience.
There's been films made using AI, there's scripts being rewritten with AI, there's sports results, a lot of some sports journalism even slightly is kind of vaguely being replaced by little AI algorithms, because it's quite easy to write. He, kicked it into the top of the, left-hand side of the net, etc. What do you think, Grace?
I think that's true. I think that Amazon's also paying Shonda Rhimes an enormous amount of money to produce content for their platform. I mean, absolutely experiments and research and development should be done in this space. But frankly, and there is the magic in those real editorial voices, and it's very, very unlikely in the near term that those are going to get replaced by a machine, in my opinion. And we see that because the most successful creators of content are the most successful creators of content for a reason, because they're very talented at it.
And but what about augmenting the human creative process?
I think if you start to look at things like virtual reality and augmented reality and how AI might help tell stories in new ways through those platforms, I think it is interesting. So I think that raw machine power plays a bigger role in telling those stories, but it will be just a new way of creating content in the same way that television came along, or colour television came along, changed the creative process rather than a replacement, in my opinion.
Dan, would you say that members of your editorial desk floor would be quite happy for not to have to write up sports results and things like that?
So I
Sort
think,
of like the basic stuff.
I mean, in lots of news organisations, there's kind of, as you say, some of the basic stuff, so stock options, stock updates, all that stuff.
Sure.
That they've been written by AI essentially for years now.
Yeah.
I think back to your point, I think augmenting the creation process using technology is not a new thing, and people have been doing it for years. I imagine there'll be more AI involved in that over the coming kind of 1 to 5 years, 10 years. Who knows what things look like when we're back here.
We've got 2 minutes left. Does anyone else want to ask a question, or should we finish up? Okay, go for it. Okay. What is it? Oops. What's the question?
The question is about story, particularly if I direct it to the BBC, fictional story. Does that have a role? It's obviously a strong part of media. Does AI have a role in that?
Fictional storytelling.
I suspect that I don't know. I suspect my answer would be the same as the previous lady. I think that as a input, as a catalyst, absolutely. Do I think that machines are going to suddenly write the plot of EastEnders tomorrow? No. And by the way, that is what media is consuming. It's very old-fashioned, but actually the biggest programmes at the moment are soaps and Love Island, and none of those have very much to do with AI.
I have to say, the brilliant, and no AI could have written that debate about Brexit on Love Island the other day. Oh my goodness, that was fantastic. Well, I think we're basically out of time. So I really want to say thank you to our panel. Please say thank you to our panel and have a good day. My name is Mike Butcher. Blah, blah, blah.